It was 1974. My wife, who was then, we were dating, we were at my parents' house, and we felt led of the Lord to do some intercession. And I was praying, and we were interceding, and I remember getting up, and my body didn't get up with me. And I looked down at my body laying on the floor, and I'm standing looking at it, and I'm thinking, is this the big one? And then I thought to myself, well, if this is the big one, it's not that big. And then, you know how your arm will fall asleep, like if you lay on it wrong? But then when you pull it and straighten it out, the tingling of the blood going back in your arm, that's the only way I can describe the feeling that seemed to go from my body to what I know now as my spirit. And as that tingling, as the only way I can explain it, it came in, it's like all of a sudden this conscious awareness came into me. Oh, this isn't the big one. The Lord wants to speak to me. I just began to float out, and I remember levels, and I wanted to look into them, but I knew that I couldn't. And I remember as this floating ended, I was at like the base of a mountain. You know, for the longest time, people that went to heaven would talk about going through the gate of the city and all this stuff, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, man, what's wrong with my trip to heaven? You know, I went to a mountain. They got gates and cities and all this stuff until I read in the book of Hebrews, it says we have come to Mount Zion. And I realized that's where I was. I landed at the base of this mountain. I remember walking up to the ridge of that mountain and looking over, and just huge plateau filled with millions of people in white robes. And the one that sat on the throne, you couldn't tell if you were looking at the front or the back of him. It was just like the outline of a man in white light. And I remember from the back row to the front, people would just fall down in adoration to the Lord. And I remember as they would fall down, it was like something hit the Lord sitting there on the throne, and it was just like, oh. And then he would look at everybody and go, wah, and just like roar, but it was a compassion, loving, tender roar, if you could imagine. There's no way to explain how it sounded and felt. And then from the front row to the back, they would all jump up, shouting and screaming. And this just kept going on and on and on, back and forth. And I'm standing on this ridge behind them watching it. And then, I don't know how to explain it, but then suddenly I'm standing in front of the throne. And there's Jesus looking at me. And he took my hand and he said, come with me. And he just tugged my hand and turned. And when he tugged my hand and turned, we were instantly in this room. And I remember he waved his hand, and this whole wall of the room disappeared. And it looked like we were standing there looking into outer space. And I saw these hands like this, and they were just doing this. And I knew they were the hands of the Father. And there was this terrible stuff spewing out. And I knew that whatever it was, it's like filth, like nasty. But I knew that whatever it was coming out of whatever was in his hand that he was pressing on. And then when he opened his hands up, this, when I say beautiful, you couldn't see her, she was veiled, but this glowing, beautiful bride. And I remember looking at the Lord and going, I don't like this. I don't want to see this. And it just jumped out of my mouth. I said, I don't like this. It seems she has more glory than her. I'm drawn to look at her. And he said, well, she is my glory. And I said, chapter and verse. And he said, have you not read in 1 Corinthians? And he quoted the chapter and the verse that he says that a man's bride is his glory. He said, if your wife is your glory, my bride is my glory. And I realized I was looking at a spiritual, symbolic representation of the church, Jesus' bride. And then suddenly, I began to see manifestations of things that were about to happen. Part of it had to do with sexuality. Part of it had to do with the operation of finance and greed. And the Lord began to show me, he said, you will see sexual sins in the ministry. He said, you will see financial sins in the ministry. He said, and things will fall in ministry because of these things. And then he took this deep breath as if this is the big one. But he said, and the day will come that you will see pride fall in the ministry. And he said, and when that happens, the great revivals will begin to occur. It'll be as if one wave comes in on top of another, never going back out to sea, until my glory covers the earth as the waters cover the oceans. I said, I want to be there. He said, you will be. I believe with all my heart, this is the generation that's about to experience that. It's going to be wonderful. It's going to be phenomenal. And we have to be ready for it.